Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. I hope you're well today. Today we're going to be starting a little bit of an informal series on the INFJ consciousness. What does the INFJ consciousness look like? Not merely as a cognitive phenomenon, but also as an existential phenomenal thing, as something that is experienced in a deepest possible sense by a person of the INFJ type. In this book, which by the way is called The Ecstatic Soul and is my investigation of the INFJ personality, the most in-depth investigation that you can find online. It's available in the description box below. All the links are available to Amazon, to all the countries, paperback format, ebook format, less than $10. You help me, I help you. So in this book, what do I do? One of the things that I do in this book is to discuss something that I feel is often passed over by personality theories of all sorts, both past and contemporary. And this is the idea of a qualitative experience of consciousness. That is to say that there's a difference between saying, for example, an INFJ has a function stack that is NI-FE-TI-SE, or an ISTP has a function stack that's TI-SE, NI-FE. There's a difference between establishing distinctions between function stacks in this way, where you essentially gather, the various cognitive functions, arrange them in a certain order and say, okay, that's the function stack of that type, and that's how I identify that type. Sure, I mean, that's fine. You can do this, and there's different theories to determine ways of doing it. But there's a difference between that and something that is experienced as an INFJ consciousness, experienced as an ISTP consciousness. In other words, once you've accepted that, a certain type has a certain function stack, another type has a different function stack, we can move to asking the question, what does it feel like to be a person of that type? What does it feel like to have that function stack? How do you experience life? How do you experience making decisions? How do you experience thinking? How do you experience acting? How do you experience loving? All these various questions are not questions that boil down to just describing cognitive functions. They're questions that require more existential type of descriptions that are sometimes achieved in great literary works in an indirect way, but can also be delivered in non-literary work like The Ecstatic Soul in a more psychological/philosophical way. And in describing the INFJ consciousness as I do in this book, I propose to break it down into four main dimensions. First dimension, I've already made a few videos on that topic. I've also had an interview with Eric Thor on this topic, so I'll link all the related videos in the description box below, where the question of INFJ alienation linked to the gathering of extroverted sensation at an unconscious level combined with a high level of awareness of processing by NI creates this distance from the reality of the physical world, whereby certainty seems for the INFJ to come from something that is not the physical world, and that can create this alienation from concreteness, which is in some sense the primary and originary dimension of the INFJ consciousness. For these reasons, I think that's this first dimension of alienation I've talked about enough at this stage. You can refer back to those videos if you're interested to rediscover the topic. And I'll consider that it's more or less established that we have this basis, alienation. In this video, I'd like to move on to the second dimension, and I discuss this in my book, particularly chapters 2 and 3. So this second dimension of the INFJ consciousness is not something that replaces alienation. It's not something that comes as a replacement for alienation. It comes with alienation. It's another side of the INFJ consciousness, which is associated with slightly different functions than alienation is. So if you think that alienation is associated mainly with NI and SE, this second dimension, which I called haziness, like the quality of being hazy, of not being clear, a certain blurriness, a certain shroudedness in lack of transparency. Haziness is associated primarily with FE&TI. And let me immediately add that although it is primarily associated with FE&TI in the INFJ, it can only really manifest itself with the background presupposition of alienation. In other words, although NI and SE, as they are functioning for the INFJ, are not the primary functions in how haziness operates in the INFJ consciousness. Haziness still presupposes alienation via dominant NI and inferior SE. So the background presuppositions, they're still there, but the FE and TI are the ones that are most clearly expressed in this phenomenon. So what is the phenomenon of haziness? This is another aspect of how INFJs feel like. What it feels like to be an INFJ. Haziness is something that essentially I could describe as an INFJ never quite getting to the stage where they feel like they have people sorted out. In other words, when they're interacting with other people, they kind of always have this impression, this sensation that people are works in progress and have an infinite number of different layers that can be peeled off. And INFJs, it's not necessarily that they enjoy analyzing people and trying to figure them out and peeling off layer after layer. They do enjoy this to an extent, but really the enjoyment they derive from it is the enjoyment of something that is more akin to a metaphysical need. You need to drink water, so when you drink water, you feel pleasure, but it's more like relief. It's like the relief from the pain of being thirsty is pleasure, but it's not pleasure in itself. It's because there was a need in the first place that is finally satisfied that you feel the pleasure. It's a little bit similar with the INFJ's need to investigate people as they interact with them, even people that they've been friends with for a long time. These people remain, like I said, works in progress, unfinished landscapes that ought to be scrutinized further and further. And haziness is essentially this idea that when an INFJ type interacts with a person, it's as if they can never get to the stage where the person is just this complete whole that can be accessed once and for all and be taken for granted as this complete picture. There's something blurry around the outline. There's the borders of the photos are still constantly evolving, and the INFJ is kind of trying to get a sense of figuring out, okay, when can I stop and just say, this person, I know them, I can just be with them without feeling the need to, excavate more and more layers, until I get to this essence of the person that I never quite find anyway, because the process that is spurred on by haziness is indefinitely long. There's no end to it. The end to it is really to resolve haziness into clarity, which is something that I explain in this book, can be achieved more by the likes of the Buddha than by the likes of Plato or Schopenhauer. But if I'm to discuss, how haziness can be clarified into indeed clarity, another video will be required to sort of explain that a little bit. But let me just take a moment to explain why haziness happens in the INFJ consciousness. Why are INFJs always kind of searching for an identity in other people that they never manage to completely find, which I also hypothesize in the book might be considered one of the existential causes of the INFJ gaze, which is different from the INTJ stare. Obviously, there are things in common. There's physiological properties in common as well, but there's a difference. The INFJ gaze is less of a glare, and it's a more searching, inquisitive kind of stare. And I think that is completely related to the phenomenal experience of haziness, because it's a gaze that is trying to locate and in a certain sense lock. The gaze is trying to fix a particular object but never quite manages, so it's as if the gaze is looking through them. That's the hazy gaze. it's not the same as the INTJs there. And again, that could deserve a whole video unto itself. But essentially, haziness is due to the fact that because INFJs are alienated from the outside world in this primordial sense, and because in order to experience the world is divided between the subject and the object, so for example, I'm a subject, you guys that I'm addressing are other subjects, but you, insofar as I'm addressing you, you are an object in my field, and there are lots of different objects around me. Now that's something that I take for granted, but really my argument is that an INFJ can only take this for granted once the rational functions, FE and TI, are sort of mustered to accomplish this. They cannot accomplish this directly through the gathering of extrovert perception, because it is so unconscious in the case of the INFJ, whereas someone like an ENTP, for example, accomplishes this immediately and without even having to really think about it, because dominant NI, same with for the SFP, STP, and ENFP. So the INFJ is alienated from objects. In being alienated from objects, they're kind of alienated from their own subjecthood as well, because they're not able to, if you're not able to have the concept of an object, then the separation of the object from the subject is not really available to you either. And that is kind of what is defined as the primary condition for experiencing yourself as an independent self, as a subject, by Descartes, who was the inventor of the theory of the I think therefore I am. So in order to experience yourself as a subject, you need to be able to differentiate between what is not you and what is you, but also get a sense of what you are in a positive sense of the word, not just that you're not these other things that are beyond you. So the experience of haziness is essentially the experience of obviously getting a sense that you're interacting throughout the day with what is not you, with others. So you're always othering, the other people, things, but you're not quite getting to the stage where you can identify them as autonomous subjects and yourself as an autonomous subject. This is something that an INFJ accomplishes. Obviously, we're all able to function as society, so we accomplish this and we don't necessarily bring this to mind. But my argument is that because we're alienated from the outside world in the first place, this accomplishment is something that we can manage only through the domain of judgment. And the domain of judgments is the domain of rational functions, something we accomplish by talking to people and eventually realizing that these people have thoughts, moods, they change their minds, they have idiosyncrasies. So obviously they are independent selves or subjects. And by contrast, the INFJ figures out that they are that as well. All this happens and is as an existential level. It's something that you can only explain really in terms of what's presupposed by the INFJ consciousness to get to that level. But because of fundamental alienation, even as the INFJ interacts with other people and gets a better sense of who they are, because they're alienated from them in the last analysis, they can never latch on to a solid kind of, like the jutting piece of rock where they can just latch onto it and say, okay, I got there now. They are in this way, I am that way. We differ in this manner and we can interact on that basis. The INFJ can never really get to that point. They remain in this hazy state as they're interacting with other people. And FE and TI are constantly marshaled to try to get closer and closer to the truth. But the truth remains elusive to an extent. Hence this never-ending quest to get to know others better and themselves better. It comes from a fundamental existential need, which I call the INFJ conscious dimension of haziness. Let me know what you think in the comments, guys. Consider also dropping me a like and subscribing. And I'll talk to you soon. Take care.